This morning to 1 John. 1 John chapter 2. 1 John chapter 2. Good to have Chad and Jenny and their family back from vacation. Bert and Donna are away and their family on vacation. Just left yesterday, so be praying for them. I'm an avid basketball fan and coached here for a couple of years, middle school, JV, and then assisted Bert in varsity. Well, in the basics of basketball, there's a fundamental thing that you teach when you're first beginning to teach basketball players. When I used to coach middle school basketball, you had to start with the basics every time. And some of them you even had to say, okay, this is a goal, and you're trying to throw this round object through that round object. That's how basic you had to be sometimes. But you start with the basics. One of the basic things in basketball to learn is called the triple threat position. This guy on the screen is demonstrating a triple threat position. You teach a student or you teach a player to catch the ball, first of all, with his strong hand. If he's right-handed, you catch the ball behind the ball, and then the other hand just comes along to accompany and hold the ball in place. But when you catch it, you come to what is called a jump stop. You jump stop, your feet are apart, and you're ready to go. It's called triple threat position. Hey, Colby, throw me this one time. So time you throw it, you catch it in triple threat position. You teach a player to always catch it in that position, because then at this position, I'm ready to do three things. I can either then go from here, I can begin to dribble and move on the guy, or when I catch it in this position, I'm right in the position to then pull up and shoot it. Or I'm in this position, as I catch it, I can throw it right back. Ready, Colby? I can catch it and throw it right back to another player. I can do all three of those things. The thing is, the adversary, the one who is guarding me, doesn't know which of the three I'm going to do. You don't know whether I'm going to shoot, whether I'm going to pass, or I'm going to go around you. If you watch players very much, it's hard to determine. When they catch it here, they can fake for a shot and then go around you. But they do that all from the triple threat position. Let me tell you what, believers, this morning, Satan has three triple threats. Three threats that he comes at us with every day. I want to explain those to you this morning. I want to explain to you the triple threat. Look with me in your copy of God's words to 1 John chapter 2. Three things today that have great potential of becoming a stronghold in your life. Look with me at 1 John chapter 2. Let's look together at verse 15. Do not love the world or the things that belong to the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in him. Because everything that belongs to the world, then he gives a parentheses right here, okay? Because everything that belongs to the world, then his parentheses, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride in one's lifestyle is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world with its lust is passing away. But the one who does God's will remains forever. I want you to take heed to what the Bible says this morning about three specific areas of our life. Now listen to me. I want to help you. I want to help you. I've been reading behind Dr. Johnny Hunt. I've been reading one of his books, and I use a lot of influence today from that book as I put together a sermon based on some thoughts that he had. And I began to dig more and more. And then yesterday, I even changed it even more. But I want you to look at three areas this morning that are extremely important in the life of the believer. The first one, he mentions there in verse 16, the lust of the flesh. Let me tell you what, folks. Sexual sins are an epidemic problem in our culture today. Epidemic. Every part of our culture is inundated with sexual temptation. Now, let me help some parents real quick. You might be going, oh no, my child is in here and they're only 13 and he's going to preach on this topic. Let me tell you something, parents. Get your heads out of the sand. Let me tell you, get your heads out of the sand, because your child probably knows more than you know. I'm telling you, we are inundated. You cannot drive down the highway without seeing something on a billboard that provides sexual temptations. It's on every corner. It's in all forms of media. It's on the TV. It's at the checkout counter at the supermarket. It is everywhere we go. It is epidemic in our culture today. The lust of the flesh. But you know, as I begin to think about how to present this week, the best example that I could give to you on how to deal with types of sexual sins and temptations is the story of Joseph as he is fleeing temptation and immorality. Turn with me in your Bibles. Keep your finger there in 1 John, but turn with me to Genesis 39. As you're turning there, let's remind ourselves of the story. Joseph was sold into slavery. He was sold into captivity by his brothers when he was young. And now Joseph has worked, and God has redeemed him, and God is blessing him. And now Joseph is headed for royalty. He's headed to Pharaoh's palace. He's headed to Potiphar's home. Look with me at chapter 39 of Genesis, and we're going to see about what happens with Joseph now. Now, Joseph had been taken to Egypt. An Egyptian named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, serving in the household of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord made everything he did successful, Joseph found favor in his master's sight and became his personal attendant. Potiphar also put him in charge of his household and placed all that he had owned under his authority. From the time that he put him in charge of his household and of all that he had owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph. The Lord's blessing was on all that he owned in his house and in all his fields. He left all that he owned under Joseph's authority. He did not concern himself with anything except the food that he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. After some time, his master's wife looked longingly at Joseph and said, "Sleep with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, my master does not concern himself with anything in his house, and he has put all that he owns under my authority. No one in this house is greater than I am. He has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. So how could I do such a great evil and sin against God?" Although she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her. Now one day he went into the house to do his work, and none of the household slaves were there. She grabbed him by his garment and said again, "Sleep with me." But leaving his garment in her hand, he escaped and ran outside. The lust of the flesh. Let's look at this story. In point number one, Joseph was a successful person. Joseph was successful. It says it several times. Look again in verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. He was sold into Egyptian bondage and sold into slavery. And now he is going to be an officer or an underling in Pharaoh's army. He's going to be next to the top. This is an amazing story. Listen, humanly, Joseph got his promotion from Potiphar, but we all know where that promotion came from. He got his position from God. Joseph's position was a part of God's plan. Joseph was sold to Potiphar. Potiphar was a military man. It says that he was the captain of the guard. He had military prominence. He was a man with military expertise and held life and death every day in his hands as he was a soldier. Now, the captain of Pharaoh's army, the captain of the guard, gave Joseph the top position that he could put him in. He put him in charge even of his own household. He was literally the personal assistant to the top military leader in Egypt, the country he had been sold into slavery. That's a whole nother sermon right there. What an example of God's grace. But he's now the top military assistant. Listen, it would be much like if you were put as a military assistant to General Mathis in Washington, the Secretary of Defense. If you were his top assistant, kind of the same thing here. Joseph was a leader, and a diligent leader, and a competent leader, and a responsible leader. And Potiphar saw that and said, I am going to reward you for being that kind of person. Joseph was successful, and Potiphar recognized it. One commentator said clearly, God was the secret to Joseph's success. Luck had nothing to do with it. But let me tell you what I just wrote this week or several months ago in the side of my Bible right here by these verses. To whom much is given, much is required. And when Joseph received this position, the temptations became stronger. Secondly, Joseph was not only successful, Joseph was stunning. I almost put Joseph was a stud. But I like the word stunning better. He was stunning. Look at verse 6, the latter part of verse 6. It said he left all that he owned under Joseph's authority. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now look right here. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. Back in Fonzie's day, in Happy Days day, they'd say Joseph was a hunk. He was stunning. He was successful. He had everything. He was a complete package. He had the look. He was stunning. Chuck Swindoll said this, temptations that accompany prosperity are far greater and far more subtle than those that accompany adversity. Joseph was prospering now. He had grown up out of that slavery, and now he was prospering. And Potiphar's wife was pretty straightforward. Let's look at that verse as I quoted. Potiphar's wife came to him and said, sleep with me. Let me translate that from the Hebrew for you. Here's a translation right from the Hebrew. That can be translated, sleep with me. Aren't you glad I'm pretty smart? Does anybody have any questions there? But listen, let me tell you, for some of you who are a little slow, she's not wanting to take a nap. She is chasing Joseph. She is chasing him with all her might. Listen, a young man told Brother Archie years ago, said, Brother Archie, I must be either the weirdest or the most ugly man in the world because I've never had a woman come to me and approach me and try to get me to do anything inappropriate with her. Brother Archie said, on the contrary, bud, that means you're not putting yourself out for sale and you're not giving off wrong signals that a woman would say, hey, he might be interested. You're doing what's right. Let me tell you what. Let me tell you, men, don't you put out the wrong signals. Ladies, don't put out the wrong signals. What a compliment to that young man. Listen, that's why I want my wife to be with me as much as she can. That's why I want her walking down the aisle with me, holding my hand, because I want this body of believers to see I'm with her and she's for me and I'm not for sale and neither is she. We're not even for rent. That's why I put precautions in my life. That's why she answers my cell phone from time to time. Some of you sometimes will call me and Kim will answer and say, oh, I thought I was calling Chris's phone. This is Chris's phone. What do you need? Can I help you? Joseph had too much to lose. And he told her that he was not going to do that to her husband. But it's interesting, Joseph doesn't say that. He doesn't say, I'm not going to do this to your husband. Who does Joseph say I'm not going to do it to? God. That's interesting. He doesn't say, I'm not going to do this to your husband. He says, I'm not going to do this to God. Listen, when we sin, we may disappoint people here, but more than anybody else, we disappoint God. But Potiphar's wife was chasing. Listen, don't you send out the wrong signals. Joseph was stunning. He was successful. But then thirdly, Joseph was smart. Potiphar's wife was on the pursuit. She was relentless. She was an evil person. She was trying to seduce him. He was a challenge to her. The offer was clear, and it didn't happen just once. Verse 10, it says, she pursued him day after day after day after day after day. Let me tell you what, young ladies in the crowd, let me speak to my young ladies in the crowd, unmarried young ladies. Listen, don't put yourself out for sale. And listen, let me tell you, you might be at the age right now, you're shopping. You're trying to find Mr. Right. Okay, you may be shopping and you may be browsing and you may be looking, but don't you ever put yourself on the clearance rack. And don't you give away your purity. Because I'm going to tell you what, the moment you do, the moment Satan is saying, come on, it's okay. The moment you give it away, he's going to say, aha, see, you're not as good as you think you are. And you can't withstand my temptation. He's going to start accusing you. Don't give away your purity, young men and young women. You know, I probably don't need to just say young. I just need to say men and women. Listen, men, if a lady keeps popping up in coincidental places and the moments continue to strike up conversation and you feel awkward, do what Joseph did. Run! You say, well, Joseph was a coward. No, he wasn't. He ran because that was the right thing to do. 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 18. Run from sexual impurity. Every sin a person can commit is outside the body. On the contrary, the person who is sexually immoral sins against his own body. God himself tells us to run. That's not being a chicken, it's being smart. And it's not just being smart. If you're a Christian this morning, it's being holy. Run. Flee it. And the last time he did what only you can do sometimes, he ran. He told her, I got too much to lose. Listen, if you forget everything else I say today, if you don't remember any point, remember this. Joseph said no. Joseph said no. Listen, it's not if it's going to be a temptation in your life, it's when. I was with our men yesterday at a men's conference in New Bern, and Pastor Johnny Hunt was preaching. Pastor Johnny, I believe he said, was 60, I can't remember, 63 or 67, but anyhow, in that range. And he said, pastors will come up to me, especially young men will come up to me and say, Pastor Johnny, tell me, at what age can I expect sexual temptations to stop? Pastor Johnny went, I'll let you know one day. I'll let you know. They're not going to stop. Remember what I told you last week? Temptation doesn't just knock. It lays on the doorbell. Clarence McCarty said this about Joseph. This was no ordinary temptation. Joseph was not a stone or a mummy, but he was a red-blooded young man in his late 20s. It was not one temptation on one day. It was a repeated temptation, day after day after day after day after day. Listen, if you think for one moment that you can resist temptation and that it'll go away, don't fool yourself. Immorality. But why do people gravitate to it? Not just because of temptation, it's for satisfaction. Listen, God is more concerned about my holiness than he is my happiness or my satisfaction. Let me just tell you, fornication, according to the Bible, is sin. Let me define it a little bit better. Sex before marriage is sin. Hey, now listen, if you're a politically correct person, you might want to get up and leave because I'm not going to be too politically correct because I'm more concerned about being biblically correct. Okay, so let me just say some things this morning. Let me get them right out here. Sex before marriage is sin. Living together before marriage is sin. Homosexual lifestyles are sin. Pornography is sin. Sexting is sin. Lusting is sin. All those things are sin and are sin in God's eyes. What are you doing? Flee it. Listen, then we get into the lust of the eyes in this next part. But the lust of the eyes is not just talking about lusting at looking at things or wrong images. It's talking about things that want to draw us, not just sexual temptation. We'll get to that in just a moment. But how about your lust of your eyes? How about your thoughts? How about what you say? How about, the Bible says, all appearances of evil. And I just got to stop to get to the next point. But the lust of the flesh. Secondly, the lust of the eyes. Now, the lust of eyes can mean two things: in the area of purity or in the things of covetousness and greed, the desire for things. 1 Timothy 6 and verse 9. But those who want to be rich fall into temptation, a trap, and many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And by craving it, some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pains. There are sexual sins and sexual desires, but then there's the lust of the eyes, things that we want, money that we desire, greed that we have. Howard Hughes was at one time the richest man in all the world. All he ever wanted in life was more, 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 more. He was absolutely convinced that more would bring him true satisfaction. In 1976, Howard Hughes died after experimenting with everything that you could possibly experiment in life to get pleasure. Hughes was extremely poor physical condition when he died. He suffered from malnutrition, kidney damage. He was a shriveled up, sunken in face. However, his mind was not affected. X-rays revealed he had 5 broken off hypodermic needles stuck in his body from drugs. Howard Hughes believed the myth, and he died a billionaire junkie trying to find happiness in more. J.D. Rockefeller said this: the poorest man I know is the one who has nothing but money. An old Roman proverb says this: money is like salt water. The more you drink, the thirstier you get. You ever been in the ocean and got a good gulp of salt water? Oh, nasty. You got to get out and go get something soothing to drink. But it's just like money is like salt water. The more you drink, the thirstier you get for it. Let me tell you a couple things. You cannot love money and God. Let me remind you again of 1 Timothy 6, verse 9. It says it's a temptation, it's a trap, and many foolish and harmful desires. Listen, just like sex, money is a gift from God if used in the right way. It doesn't say money is the root of all evil. It says the love of money. Colossians 3 and verse 5, therefore put to death what belongs to your worldly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desire, greed, which is also idolatry. Listen, Jesus talked more about money in the Bible than he did heaven and hell combined. He taught more about money. So this lust of the flesh, you cannot love God and money. Having more money will not make you happier. Let me say that to you. Having more money will not make you happier. Let me ask you this in the form of a question. How much more money would it take to make you happy? A poll was done on that recently. But it never pans out. You never make enough money to be happy. You know how I know that? Look at all the athletes playing professional sports. They can't get happy. The suicide rate is high. They say that 80% of every NBA player 2 years after he's retired is broke. having more money will not make you happier. Listen, money will buy this. Money will buy a bed, but it won't buy sleep. Money will buy books, but it won't buy brains. Money will buy food, but will not buy an appetite. It'll buy a house, but not a home. It will buy medicine, but it can't buy your health. It will buy luxuries, but not culture. It'll buy amusements, but not happiness. It will buy religion, but not salvation. And it'll buy you a passport to anywhere in the world except heaven. Money cannot buy your happiness. And having more money is not going to make you happier. Giving is the cure for greed. If you took time to look at the verses in 1 Timothy, you'd find out that greed is a problem. We all get greedy. It's not a sin to be rich. It is a sin to be greedy and stingy. Researchers have found that there's almost no correlation between levels of income and happiness. In fact, between the years of 1957 and 1990, income levels in the U.S. doubled. Yet during that same period, people's levels of happiness did not increase. In fact, reports of depression actually increased tenfold. Divorce, suicide, alcoholism, and drug abuse rose to an all-time high. You cannot allow the desire for money to trick you into that it will provide happiness. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes for things, for money, for other things. But then thirdly, the last one that he mentions in 1 John is the pride of life. The pride of life. Proverbs 16 and verse 18 says, "Pride cometh before destruction, and an arrogant spirit before a fall." The story is told of a little K4 boy 2 weeks after his K4 class, after he started. And in that K4 class, he began to talk with the teacher. And he came home one day with a big compliment. And he told his grandma, "Grandma, I'm the smartest kid in the class." And the grandma said, "Wow, did the teacher tell you that today?" And he replied, "No, ma'am, I told her." Pride. Pride. Keep your hand down if you don't ever deal with pride. Where you at? I said, keep your hand down if you don't ever deal with pride. Every hand should go up. Every one of us deal with pride, don't we? Every one of us. Every one of us deal with pride. I went to the dictionary this week and I simply looked up the word pride. Let me give you the definitions or synonyms for pride. Self-admiration, self-assumption, self-conceit, self-congratulation, self-esteem, self-glory, self-importance, self-love, self-opinion, self-satisfaction. Does anybody hear a common word? That's right, you some smart people. Self. I don't know about you, but I can get consumed with what brings life. The word in Proverbs 16, verse 18 that I read to you a while ago, the word destruction implies a total shattering of one's life. A proud, arrogant man is almost always a self-sufficient man who doesn't think he needs God or only comes to God when he's absolutely at his wits' end. You know what? Jesus was not a prideful person, but he was probably the one person on earth who deserved to be. He was a perfect person. You know, I heard Pastor Johnny say this quote yesterday, and I wrote it down quickly. The only reference Jesus ever made about himself in Scripture is this: for I am meek and lowly. Only reference Jesus ever made about himself. Sinful pride can make us think we're better than everybody else. Let me wrap this thing up. I'm just going to have to skip some. Let me tell you what the voices of the world are telling you. It says in those verses, these, because everything that belongs to the what? To the world. Then that's the parentheses. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Those are in those parentheses. Those are the things of the world. But let me tell you what the voices of the world are shouting today. Here's what the voices of the world are shouting. Appetite says, be sensuous, enjoy yourself. Education says, be more resourceful and expand yourself. Materialism says, be satisfied and please yourself. Psychology says, be confident, fulfill yourself. Pride says, be superior, promote yourself. Humanism says, be capable, believe in yourself. God says, be wise, humble yourself. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. The triple threat. You know what it means when a preacher closes his Bible and looks at his watch? Nothing. I have prayed all week for this moment. You think this is a hard sermon to listen to? I'll trade places with you. It's a hard sermon to preach. But I pray for this moment right now. And I said, God, I need a good closing illustration. And I need something to really get their attention at the end of this message. And I went through Wednesday and I didn't find it. I finished the sermon on Thursday and Friday, and I still didn't have it. And I said, well, I'll just leave everything done except the end, and I'll work on it some more through the weekend. I got into Saturday morning, and I still didn't have it. Then about 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, God gave it to me. About 10 o'clock Saturday morning. My buddy Henry Horn from Chocowinity Church was preaching his heart out. And I was sitting there. And God just began to get a hold of my heart and shake me for everything I'm worth. And God began to convict my heart of pride and arrogance and a lack of humility. And before about 500 men, I stepped out and I ran to that altar and I poured my face on that altar, and I said, God, please forgive me. Please forgive me. Forgive me of times when I'm arrogant and I'm prideful. And Lord, if you'll forgive me, you use me however you want to. I got up from there, and as I drove home, and then this morning I got back up and I said, God, I still don't have a closing illustration. And he said, yes, you do. Because this will be a hard sermon to come forward and do business with God. But do you think I wanted to step out in front of 500 men and a bunch of preachers that I know and cry at the altar? No, I didn't want to. I wanted everything within me to let my pride keep me in the pew. Don't you let pride make you sit in that pew this morning. The triple threat. but you just don't know which one Satan's going to throw at you today. Will you pray with me?